At the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the Witch King fell at the hands of Eowyn and Merry. While this no doubt had an impact on the Morgul host, they did have a second in command, Gothmog, who threw Mordor's reserves into battle. But the thing about Gothmog is that he only gets mentioned once. We don't know what happens to him, and we actually don't even know what he is. So in this episode of Middle-earth Mysteries, let's talk about Gothmog, and ask the question, who or what was he exactly? When I said Gothmog only gets mentioned once, I wasn't exaggerating. After the Witch King is killed and Eomer leads his Rohirrim on a manic charge through the enemy lines, Gothmog, described as the Lieutenant of Morgul, takes command. Originally, Mordor's reserves had been kept waiting in Osgiliath, but with the battle teetering on the edge of a knife, Gothmog throws them into the fray. There's Easterlings with axes, Variags from Karn, Scarlet-wearing Haradrim, and the infamous men of Far Harad who are likened to half-trolls. Some of them are deployed against the Rohirrim, and the others are deployed against the Gondorians sallying forth from the city, in an attempt to stop them from linking up. After that, we don't hear anything about Gothmog. We don't know if he was killed in the fighting, as most of the Morgul host were. We don't know if he retreated across to Anduin with the survivors. Either way, he's never heard from again, and it's a fairly safe assumption that he might have been killed in Sauron's fall or its direct aftermath. But his fate isn't the only thing that is unknown. We actually don't know what Gothmog is. In the Peter Jackson films, he's portrayed as a deformed orc commander who was allegedly meant to resemble Harvey Weinstein, but Tolkien never describes Gothmog as an orc. So let's use the few clues we have to take a guess at what he might have been. So what clues do we even have? Honestly, only really two. One is that Gothmog had a high rank. He's described as the Lieutenant of Morgul, and he took over the Morgul host after the death of the Witch King. The other clue is his name, Gothmog, which was also the name of the Lord of the Balrogs who perished in the First Age. Interestingly, Gothmog is not Black speech, it's Sindarin, and it means something along the lines of Dread Oppressor. It's pretty unlikely that a servant of Sauron would have given themselves a Sindarin name, so it seems like Gothmog might have been a name given to him by his enemies, and given that he shared the name with a literal Balrog, he might have been fairly formidable. Alright, so what are the options? Let's follow Peter Jackson's thinking and talk about Gothmog as an orc first. Now, this is certainly possible. Sauron obviously had plenty of orcs as servants, and some of them did attain high ranks or were given important missions. Shagrat was the commander of the garrison at Cirith Ungol, Gorbag was a captain of Morgul orcs, and Grishnak was given the mission to retrieve the One Ring and was even present at Gollum's torture. Going by this, there's no reason to believe that an orc couldn't rise high up enough to become the Lieutenant of Morgul, provided they were competent enough. My only skepticism comes from whether Sauron's mannish servants would be okay taking orders from orcs. But the name could cast doubts on Gothmog being an orc. Orcs have names that derive from their own languages, so the idea of an orc taking a Sindarin name, the language of their most hated enemies, is kind of absurd. Of course, Gothmog could have been a name given to him by his enemies, such as the Gondorians, but this would be the only occasion such a lofty title is given to an orc. Normally, if an enemy gets given a Sindarin or Quenya name, they would have to be a big deal, and I just can't see an orc receiving that honour. In all likelihood, if Gothmog was an orc, he'd just have an orcish name. That being said, it's possible that Gothmog wasn't just an orc and was actually a bulldog, fallen Maya who had taken the forms of orcs. If this was the case, he would be far more formidable than a regular orc and would be immortal, so plenty of time to earn a dangerous reputation. He also probably wouldn't have an orcish name. However, while we know that bulldogs served Morgoth, we're never told of any serving Sauron. As beings of a similar level, they either did not care to serve him, like Durin's Bane, or they were possibly all dead by the time of the Third Age. Another option is that Gothmog was actually one of the Nazgul. There's 7 Nazgul who are unnamed, so one of them could certainly be Gothmog. The Lieutenant of Morgul, second in command to the Witch King, would be a position fitting to a Nazgul. And a Nazgul being called Gothmog is also possible. If his real name wasn't known, just like the Witch King's, then he would probably earn a name from his enemies, and Dread Oppressor would definitely fit one of the Nazgul. There were also other Nazgul present at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and if Gothmog was one, he would have survived the battle. The only problem with this comes from an out-of-universe perspective. If Gothmog was one of the Nazgul, it feels kind of odd that Tolkien wouldn't have elaborated on that further, like he did with Khamûl the Easterling. Considering he didn't divulge the names of any of the other Nazgul, not even the Witch King, it seems strange that he would suddenly reveal the name of one of the Nazgul without making it clear that it was one of the Nazgul, and then simply never mention it again. Unfortunately, we don't know Tolkien's intentions here. It wouldn't be the only time he's revealed very valuable information in what could be considered a throwaway line. Literally half of the videos in this series are about that exact scenario. The last option, and personally the one I think most likely, is that Gothmog was a man, specifically a Black Númenórean, who were amongst Sauron's most trusted, cruelest servants. If Gothmog was a Black Númenórean, he would actually share some similarities with another high-ranking Black Númenórean in Sauron's service, the Mouth of Sauron, who was the Lieutenant of Barad-dûr. So, the Lieutenant of Morgul also being a Black Númenórean would fit nicely here, and perhaps indicate something of a system within Mordor. Perhaps fortresses like Dol Guldur and Minas Morgul have a Nazgul at the top, and a Black Númenórean as the second in command, so that if the Nazgul were out on a mission, those fortresses would remain in powerful hands. On top of that, it might also explain the name. The Mouth of Sauron was called the Mouth of Sauron because nobody, including possibly himself, knew his real name. It's possible that Gothmog was in a similar position. Nobody knew his actual name, so Gothmog was a title given to him by his enemies. This wouldn't be the first time that Black Númenóreans were given names in Elvish languages. Herumor, a Black Númenórean lord from the Second Age, meant Black Lord in Quenya. His contemporary, Fuinur, had something to do with gloom, night, or darkness in Sindarin. The infamous Queen Beruthiel's name also meant something along the lines of Wrathful Queen in Sindarin. The Lieutenant of Morgul being a Black Númenórean that was the Dread Oppressor fits perfectly here. Ultimately, we have no idea. Gothmog gets mentioned once, so we really cannot say one way or the other for sure. Because of this, different adaptations have come up with different Gothmogs. The old War of the Ring board game from 1977 says he's one of the Nazgul. Merp says he's a half-troll. The films say he's an orc, the Tales of Middle-earth card game say he's a man, and perhaps the most wild interpretation is from Lotro, where Gothmog, formerly Mordorith, is the wraith of Eomer, the last king of Gondor, who was captured and tortured in Minas Morgul. He serves as an antagonist for much of the game, and is even part of the power struggle in Mordor after Sauron's defeat. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. Let me know what you think Gothmog is in the comments. Is he an orc, a bulldog, a Nazgul, a man, a half-troll? You could even argue that Gothmog is a corrupted hobbit, because I don't think there's anything to say that he isn't. Cheers, farewell, and remember, Gothmog could actually just be a goth who mogs people. If you don't understand the words that I just said, please consider yourself lucky and be careful on the internet.